What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Bronx Pinstripes show. Nearly in February, which is the month they start baseball activities. Scott, what's up?
Grown-ass men throwing the baseball back and forth in PJs. It's
PJs. I thought it was shorts.
PJ shorts. Depends on the week. I think it can get cool. But yeah, we're getting up on it. But we do have Hall of Fame. We have our favorite topic. Our favorite topic to get angry about and to get upset about because the writers, change their tunes every year and change their criteria every year. So, but our guy got in. I think that both you and I were both looking at CC and saying, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. I think CC is a Hall of Famer, one of the best left-handed pitchers of our era, I believe, and he absolutely deserved it. So I'm super happy for him. But there are some interesting things that came out of that. Out of the voting. So yeah, excited to talk about that.
It's the most frustrating time of the year. This is what, 5, 6, 7, maybe even all 10 years, going on 11 years of this show, complaining about the injustices of the Hall of Fame and the inconsistencies of the Hall of Fame. I was, I forget where I heard this, but someone pointed out that a reason the Hall of Fame is seemingly inconsistent is obviously because new writers, new people who cover the sport start to get votes, and voters who are of the more old school are starting to get weeded out of the vote. And maybe that's why, but like you see things where we're going to talk about this, but someone like Billy Wagner, who on his first year on the ballot got like 11.5% of vote. And now 12 years later, 10 years later, he's a Hall of Famer. It's just like, how does that happen other than voters coming into the mix that value different things? That's the only way that happens.
Well, no, that's not true. Unfortunately, that's not true, because that would make a lot of sense. Like, you have new people have different thoughts. You grow up in different times, so you have different ways of thinking about how someone could and should be a Hall of Famer. But unfortunately, there's still the game that is being played within all of this as well.
But do you go from 10 to 80% or whatever? Like, how does that happen?
It's not just the campaigning. It's more so like the guys being like, oh, first year on the ballot, I know he'll get the amount that he needs to stay on the ballot, so I'm not going to vote for him because I have time. I have years. I don't need to. What I will do is I'll send, my vote over to Alvaro Espinoza because he's not going to be on the ballot I don't get it.
He signed a ball for my kids when I asked him to.
Yeah, and he was a leader in the glasses, the specs version for shortstops coming up. But like, there's the criteria sometimes depends on where they are in the process of the balloting. And to me, that's what's frustrating. What's frustrating. Instead of saying like, okay, every year, guys, let's look at this. Who here of this list is a Hall of Famer? Put them in. If they're not a Hall of Famer, don't put them in. And I understand you have to have, the amount of people on the ballot for X amount of time, but I don't think you should have to just like leave them on. Who cares if the pool is bigger? If they're still there, they're still there.
You're saying
don't let them off. Don't give a bottom criteria, a bottom percentage for them to stay on the ballot. Just open up the ballot to be a bigger ballot.
I see.
And then you just vote on who you believe is a Hall of Famer.
So everybody who's ever retired from the sport is on the ballot?
Well, I mean, obviously they'll just like dwindle down the list, but you can maybe cap it at some larger number. But the fact that you get off because you don't get a percentage of the vote is now putting you in the hands of those people who are seemingly doing the right thing with the criteria that is worthy of being a Hall of Famer. But it's just not that way. That's just not how they're doing it.
I almost think there needs to be a fan vote involved. And it obviously just counts for a percentage of it. But I feel like if you get enough of the general public to vote, it will counterbalance the stupidity that the 300 and whatever voters seem to have. And I think in a lot of cases that would come in guys not getting enough votes to stay on a ballot, or guys going from a obscenely low percentage 10 years ago to a qualifying percentage to get into the Hall of Fame now. And I feel like if you have a fan vote for the All-Star game, like, I know it's different, but like it's not completely foreign to baseball to introduce fan voting.
No, it's not. And the world of sports writing and covering teams has changed so much in the last 20 years as well, that the criteria to become an eligible voter probably should be relooked at as well. Like
you and I should get votes.
Yeah, the common sense department needs a goddamn vote. But seriously, like at the end of the day, why not just have, okay, fine. If you don't want to leave guys on there forever, make it 10 years. You have 10 years. Once you hit that number, the eligible time frame, once it starts, you have 10 years on the ballot. That's it. Everybody has 10 years on the ballot. And then you have X amount of votes that you can cast on a particular. So then you don't have to worry about keeping someone on a ballot. You don't have to worry about any of that. You just vote for who you believe is the Hall of Famer within the amount of votes that you have. Done. Like plain and simple, no gaming the system. You just do it. They have 10 years to get on. If someone doesn't get on in 10 years, then they don't belong in the Hall of Fame. You could probably lower that.
I think it's less than that.
You could probably lower that number.
I think it's 5 years maximum.
Fine. If you want to do that, then maybe you have to increase the amount on a yearly basis. I don't know, but
whatever you can increase the amount of votes, because right now you only get 10 votes, meaning you can only vote for 10 players, which also doesn't mean you have to vote for 10 players. You can vote for no players if you want. But the fact that it is capped at 10, you get this situation where people game the system. And it's like, well, I want to use one of my 10 votes to vote for this guy who I know is not going to get into the Hall of Fame this year, but I want to keep him on the ballot. And I'm going to be the one asshole who doesn't vote for Ichiro because I want to use that vote for someone else that I know Ichiro is automatically going to get in anyway.
Yeah. So there's a quote here from Jeter. Someone asked Jeter comments, and he gave a couple quotes here. I'm going to read it. A lot of players have been unbelievable that are in the Hall of Fame and haven't gotten 100% of the vote. I never expected it, and I would never sit here and say everyone should have voted for me or everyone should have voted for Ichiro. The only thing I do think is fair is that I think a lot of members of the media want athletes to be responsible and accountable. I think they should do the same thing. Yeah. I get asked the question. I get tired of being asked this question, and I think they should answer it. And I totally agree with that. Jeter is absolutely right. This is something from screaming from the rooftops. Make the ballots public. Get rid of make the ballots public. Number one, like that should be a no-brainer. There's no reason for them not to be public.
That's action number one. If I'm ever in charge
everybody should be able to say why or why not they voted for a particular person. And if they can't answer that question, that's part of the responsibility of getting the ability to vote.
It'll automatically make people vote smarter because they're not able to hide behind an anonymous vote.
Yeah. And then get rid of the minimum percentage to stay on the ballot. If you do that, now you are looking at people who belong in the Hall of Fame. You can defend either way you're going on your decision, but you're going to talk about it. And it just becomes more clean and simple. And there's less politicking and there's less gaming the system for just keeping people around, which again, removes votes potentially from people who belong in the Hall of Fame.
You need 75% of the votes or 70 or 75.
I think it's 70. Isn't it 70?
I also think you need to up that.
Okay.
I think 70 is too low. And I think if you up it to like 85%, you're definitely going to get guys who don't get in on the first ballot anymore. Like CC got 86.8%. So he still would have been a first ballot Hall of Famer if it was the 85% threshold. But I think what you'll get from this is it's a lot harder to get in via campaigning and via being on the ballot for a decade or a decade plus, because 85% is a lot bigger of a threshold than 70% or 75%.
It's 75%. It's 75%.
That's an extra 10 points is a lot. There's going to be, that's 10 or 12 voters who are like, no, I'm not voting for this. I'm not voting for Billy Wagner. Sorry, guys. I didn't vote for him 10 years ago. Why am I going to vote for him now?
Yeah. And then the other thing is, and I understand, like, I think the Hall of Fame needs to come out and say what their stance is on the steroid guys. They need to come out and there needs to be something that's...
Yeah, you can't leave it up to the voters.
You can't leave it up to the voters. You need to, like, the body who governs the Hall of Fame themselves need to come out with an official stance on how they deem that era. Because you were sending around some, and I saw them on Facebook and Twitter as well. I was like, did Andrew just research these and find Brian Giles? And then I saw the same graphic that came around.
I saw that one, but I did the Billy Wagner and Francisco Rodriguez, who we will talk about.
But
one.
the funny one, the Billy,
the Brian Giles.
The Brian Giles one is hilarious because Brian Giles You look at how many years was it? Whatever the
it was
span
over the same amount of span that Soto's been in the league.
He's got better numbers than Juan Soto, like clearly better numbers than Juan Soto.
But not. I'll pull up the graphic. They're better numbers just by like the raw numbers of them. But if you look at the rate stats, they're not better, like league stats and stuff like that. But
you can't do that because of the era.
No, but you have to do it because of the era. Because Soto's OPS plus is 160, whereas Brian Giles was 151, meaning that in his era, Brian Giles was 51% better than an average player, and Juan Soto is 60% better than a league average player. But still, in the same span that Juan Soto has been in the league, he's played 936 games. Brian Giles, 1,061 games. Those PEDs just keep you on the field, baby. He has more plate appearances, more hits, more home runs, more RBIs, more stolen bases, a higher batting average, a higher slugging percentage, and a higher OPS than Juan Soto, who just got the largest contract in baseball history.
Yeah. No, it was wild. When I saw that, I was like,
and you're like, Brian Giles, like the 48th best player in baseball at any given time. Sure.
So I mean, it does lend to my point though, is that if the Hall of Fame body, the commissioning body or the governing body of the Hall of Fame, whoever those people are, you come out and officially say, okay, we understand that numbers are inflated during this time period. However, this time period happened. It's there.
Yep.
So maybe they say none of these guys are going to be on. I don't know how they could possibly say that because they really don't know who all of those people were. And some of them are already in. What they should be going out and saying is the 90s happened. The steroids happened. There were multiple parties at fault here. It was exciting for fans. We're going to put it in the Hall of Fame because the players that played in that era played baseball in that era. And the Hall of Fame is a representation of baseball history. And that part of history happened. It did. So deem it as it will, give it its own like area, put an asterisk, do whatever the hell you want to do, but they should be recognized.
Well, the problem I think that would come of that, I think on the surface, I agree with you. But if you do that, then anyone who played in that era, should they be lumped in with that? Like, should Derek Jeter, who never had any whiffs of steroids, and I'm not here to tell you Derek Jeter definitely didn't do steroids. I'd like to believe he never did steroids, but ultimately we have no idea. But should Derek Jeter be lumped in with Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez and Roger Clemens in the steroid era just because that was his era?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So, the stance then probably needs to dictate like, these guys that failed tests or were...
So failed test, then it's great.
This is where you get gray.
David Ortiz never quote unquote failed a test, but he appeared on that 2003 list, which was supposed to be an anonymous list that he ended up admitting to doing steroids on that list. Same with many other guys, Manny Ramirez, who, in my opinion,
Manny Ramirez has failed tests.
I know that, but Manny Ramirez was also on that list, is what I was saying. Maybe Manny was not a good example there, but okay. Roger Clemens never failed a test. He obviously did steroids. There's a mountain of evidence that says he did steroids, but he never failed a test, and he's not even on the ballot anymore.
So there needs to be some clarification, I guess, from there and how they look at that era then with these steroid guys with the cloud of suspicion. And if there is, overwhelming suspicion or a test or something, then they deem it as this asterisk or whatnot. But yeah, that is a gray area. There's no doubt about it. And it's not fair to lump all of the guys into that, to that cloud of uncertainty. But I think it's a little crazy to not acknowledge those players.
Yeah.
In the Baseball Hall of Fame. Because you're essentially, you have an incomplete chapter of baseball history.
Because you have other players from
they
that
do
era.
Talk about it. There are things talking about like home runs and stuff and like individual.
Mark McGwire's bat is in the Hall of Fame from 1998. Okay, but Mark McGwire is not in the Hall of Fame. I'm sure Barry Bonds' bat is in the Hall of Fame. He's not in the Hall of Fame. Roger Clemens, like all of these guys. But then you've got Andy Pettitte, who this year increased his percentage by 14.4 points. Yeah. He admitted to using HGH.
That's just HGH, man, and he said he's sorry. Okay,
exactly though. That's like the thing. Then you're getting to the point. It's like, well, okay, how much of the steroids did he do? He was just a good teammate, and he was just trying to get back to help the team. Okay, do I like this person? He's
a good family man.
It's like there's so many stupid things that come into play, and then it's like, okay, you look at these other guys that have suspicions of steroids, but never failed the test, that it's like you're just turning a blind eye to that. David Ortiz is that example. Mike Piazza is that example. Jeff Bagwell is that example. Craig Biggio is that example. There's like the list goes on with players who are in the Hall of Fame. Ivan Rodriguez is that example. Ivan Rodriguez lost 100 pounds of muscle when he left Texas. Why? Yeah. Oh, just decided I want to go keto, I guess. Freaking like, come on, don't be so naive. Right. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I would vote for him if I had a vote. I would vote for all those other guys I just listed, except Craig Biggio, because that dude just is a stat compiler. That's neither here nor there.
He played for a long time.
He played for 93 years.
Yeah, I agree. And I understand that explanation, whatever that explanation is at the end of the day, it needs to be crafted in the right way. And everybody, there will be a lot of disagreements about it, but whatever it is, at least you're acknowledging the era. And that's where, and like, honestly, the era also threw away, it almost hit like a reset button on what are the criteria now that what is the criteria for people to get in? Is it 500 home runs? Is it 300 wins?
There's no magic number anymore.
But so there's no magic number, but you need to then not, you could even go back and say, well, the reason why this guy didn't get in because he didn't have 300 wins, he didn't have 500 home runs. You could go back and stress test that, and like some of the guys would probably get in.
I think that's what you're seeing with these guys 10 years later getting in, because someone decided to look at Billy Wagner's strikeout percentage and be like, oh, he's a Hall of Famer. He struck out 33% of batters. He must be a Hall of Famer. But the people who most recently watched him,
so does Mark Leiter Jr.
No, so here's the thing, though. That like I think when your first couple years on the ballot is the most telling, and I don't agree with all of it, because we've used this example a million times. Jorge Posada didn't make it off his first ballot, and I'll never understand that. But if on your first ballot Billy Wagner got 10% of the votes, and those were the voters that most recently watched him, if only 10% of the voters who just saw him thought he was a Hall of Famer, why then 10, 12 years later do 83% of people think he's a Hall of Famer? It doesn't make sense.
You stare at something long enough and it starts looking much better.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And that just sits wrong with me, because I think the Hall of Fame, as much as you obviously need to look at numbers and understand it in the context of things, assuming you watched that player play and you followed baseball in that era, it's a gut check thing. It's an instant reaction. Is this guy a Hall of Famer? What does your gut tell you immediately? If you have to think about it, I don't think he's a Hall of Famer.
I don't disagree. He doesn't come off, again, we've had this rule where you and I have talked about it. Like it's almost like I don't need a lot. I don't even need to look at the numbers half the time. I could just remember the player. If it's a guy that I remember watching, and there's a gut check, almost like, there can be confirmation with the numbers, but there's a gut check on who is a Hall of Famer and who is not. And I would say if you give that gut check to a lot of fans, if you give it to 100 fans, that gut check would be pretty accurate.
That's what I'm saying. Bring in the fan vote. Have the fans account for 10% of it or something like that. I think that can at least counterbalance some of the stupidity that we're seeing with this.
Yeah. So I was looking back, when the closers really started getting into the Hall of Fame. Was it?
Well, Trevor you had Catfish Hunter, and you had guys, and
Dennis Eckersley.
Yeah, he was a starter too, though.
I know this, and so I'm trying to look at like kind of like the new era of closing, because Lee Smith, it took forever to get on in.
Goose Gossage. How many times did Goose Gossage before he got in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah,
but the closer is a new position. Like it's
100%. The save is a new stat also in going back. But I'm talking about like even Goose Gossage is different because of the amount of innings that he threw. But like Trevor Hoffman is more, and like Rivera, like those are the guys.
Those are the same era though. Rivera and Hoffman are the same era. And Billy Wagner is in that era too. That's another thing. You have to look at it in the context of the era and where you ranked positionally. Billy Wagner was never the best closer in baseball. That was always Mariano Rivera. He was never even considered the best closer in his league. That was Trevor Hoffman. So it's like, and then you had other guys who were lumped in with him. Well, Jonathan Papelbon and all these guys, Gagne, like all of these guys.
What would Papelbon's bust look like?
Would
it be him making the butthole face? Like,
yes, it would. And here's the thing. The crazy thing is, by this logic, if Billy Wagner's in the Hall of Fame, Jonathan Papelbon's going to get into the Hall of Fame. He was a better close. Yes. And I showed you the numbers of Francisco Rodriguez because I was going down the list and I was like, wait, Francisco Rodriguez only got 10%. In my mind, before I looked this up, I was like, I think him and Wagner were probably pretty close in numbers. Now, admittedly, Billy Wagner's numbers are better than Francisco Rodriguez's, but are they 72% better? Which is the difference in their votes? No, they're not. They're eerily close. With the ERA 2.31 for Wagner, 2.86 for Francisco Rodriguez, ERA plus 167 for Wagner, 148 for Francisco Rodriguez, strikeouts 1,196 versus 1,142, K percentage 33%, 28.5% for Francisco Rodriguez. Like, again, Billy Wagner across the board better, but marginally better.
So just looking at the amount of closers, quote, closers that are in there, the first one ever to get into the Hall of Fame was Hoyt Wilhelm, 1985. Then
he was a knuckleballer.
Then Raleigh Fingers, okay,
Hoyt
1992.
Hoyt Wilhelm, fun fact about him. He got Roger Maris out on the last at bat of game 157 or 156 or whatever it was, the quote unquote normal regular season before the expansion games came into play in 1961. He got him to fly out, I believe, and that had he hit his 60th home run, he would have or 61st home run, he would have beaten Babe in the games that Babe had played. Right.
Interesting. Okay, hold on. I just lost my tab. There we go. So then Raleigh Fingers, Dennis Eckersley got it. So Raleigh Fingers was in 1992. Dennis Eckersley got it in 2004. So there was a 12-year gap there where there was not a quote closer put in the Hall of Fame. Bruce Sutter was put in 2006. So that kind of Eckersley kind of opened the gates for the closers to start getting in. Goose Gossage got it in
too, though. Like Eckersley was a starter.
Gossage got it in 2008. Okay. And again, we know Goose Gossage, the amount of innings that he would throw. I mean, he would throw multiple innings. It wasn't just a 1 inning close for him. So again, a little different in a lot different, I'd say, in how he was used. And then another 10 years went by and Trevor Hoffman got in. Finally, Lee Smith got in because of the amount of saves that he had also. Rivera got in 2019.
Lee Smith probably would have been a Veterans Committee thing, though.
I think he was, 2019. That was the year that Rivera got in. And then 6 years later, now we got Billy Wagner getting into the Hall. But you're right. When you look at K-Rod's numbers, I don't remember K-Rod having as long of a career as that, to be honest. Like when I looked at it, I was surprised how deep his numbers were. And he's also got a title, but he was very good. And then Billy Wagner's numbers are better, but not that much better.
That's what I'm saying.
And when you look at the actual statistics at the end of their career, the compiled numbers, they're pretty goddamn close. They're on the surface. Like you could probably make an argument for, like, which is your flavor? Which would you like? You know what I mean? Like it depends on the style or type of thing. But it's the criteria is very much up in the air right now. I don't know what it is.
No. And so by this logic, in 10 years from now, Francisco Rodriguez will have 80% of vote and be in the Hall of Fame. And we'll be doing the same thing. We'll be looking back. It's like, how did this guy who got barely 10% of the vote after 3 years get into the Hall of Fame? And I'm sure the next generation who never saw Francisco Rodriguez pitch will be asking that thing, or they'll be diving into some advanced metrics that haven't even been invented yet to figure out that, his curveball was so elite that he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame.
I was having this, my brother-in-law was here this weekend and he played baseball his whole life. Played in college for a bit and he's just a baseball nut. And we were talking about it with his dad, my father-in-law. And we were talking about the miles per hour difference as well. And like how they rate the speed out of the hand now rather than the gun before was at a different metric point. It's like 4 or 5 miles per hour hotter now than it was when you're looking back. And, but back then, Billy Wagner, he went to high school in Northern Virginia. So he was around the same age and they played around the same time. He was like coming out of high school. He was like 5'6", 5'7", throwing like 98, 100 miles per hour at that point. Just like this dude, just absolute.
You know what the coolest thing about him though is?
Yeah.
He's not left-handed.
Yeah. I saw that your note in there.
He broke his arm as a kid, and he just learned to throw left-handed because he had to.
Yeah,
that is cool. The coolest thing about him.
Just shows you kids, man. Kids can just do whatever. They just pick up and they're like, "Oh, I'm left-handed. I'm right-handed. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to throw the ball."
Yeah. Obviously, an elite closer in his prime and a fantastic major league career. All of that stuff. Just in my book, not a Hall of Famer.
And then, probably could have played another 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe. I mean, who's the next closer to get in? Is it going to be like Aroldis Chapman? Is he getting in the Hall of Fame?
I'd have to look at his numbers but again, like they're all probably pretty close. Yeah, maybe. Aroldis Chapman, when I think of dominance, I think of more dominant at his peak.
Yeah, and then the problem with a lot of these relief pitchers in the modern era is they're unbelievable for a short burst and then they fizzle out. And so you get these relief pitchers, any number of the 4 horsemen from Cleveland or anyone you want to pick who's like, wow, this guy's elite. And then 3 years later, he's fizzled out.
Yeah. So, that's part of the Hall of Fame voting. And that's why, Biggio got in as well. When you look at the duration of how long someone did something.
I like,
and again,
same
thing with a closer, like Lee Smith was closing games forever. It seemed like. I think he played for every team in Major League Baseball and was compiling up saves for a very long time. So there's something to be said about longevity in the sport.
And I'm honestly a little bit surprised Sabathia got in on his first ballot. I would have voted for him, but I also I admit I'm a little biased on Sabathia because he was a Yankee. But he got in 86.8% first ballot. He, from 2001 in his debut with Cleveland through 2019 with the Yankees, compiled the most innings of any pitcher who had debuted after 1989. So workhorse, kind of like one of the last traditional workhorse big starting pitchers before the tide started to turn on that. He's obviously, I think, helped himself with the last few years with the Yankees, just compiling a bit of numbers. And now you must be saying, oh, you just shit all over Craig Biggio for being a compiler. Well, when you compile at the end and you also had the prime that was elite, I think that is when you undoubtedly are a Hall of Famer. And I think I've said this before about Jorge Posada. If he was the Yankees designated hitter for 3 years and just had put up some decent numbers, I think he would have gotten a bigger look, which, fair or unfair, is just the reality of things.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, when you go back to the numbers as well and the criteria, I know we are biased because obviously we're Yankees fans and Jorge Posada specifically because we grew up watching him. But, that's another reason why, because of all the games that are played, it's almost like he slipped through the cracks. Like he didn't lobby enough for these guys to keep him on the ballot so that the momentum of his name and all of the things that he did and, what he meant to the team and the numbers that he put up in an era that was wild with the amount of games that he played, the postseason experience, the postseason numbers, all of these things. The fact that he didn't get more than one look on a ballot is insane. So yeah, that's another, look at him specifically and get rid of that low percentage criteria for staying on or being booted from a list.
Yeah. Or add the fan vote because the fans might vote enough to keep him on the ballot. Just be like, common sense sort of comes into play here. And it's like, no, hey, voters, you should have taken a bigger look at him.
The only thing with the fan vote is that you're just going to get so much bias and then you will get, it's like you'd almost have to do an electoral college because of the amount of people around certain teams.
Fine, whatever. Add some more variety than the 300 and some odd people who are not good at this.
Yeah. And have bias. There are biases there too. I mean, look at Albert Bell. Albert Bell was a machine, a monster, but he was an asshole.
And also steroid questions never failed the test as far as I know, but steroid questions. Yeah. I figured we could do a little impromptu CC Sabathia top 5 moments of his Yankees career. Sure. And I got to admit, I had to do a little digging for some of these things because I couldn't off the top of my head think of 5. I think you think of CC, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when CC Sabathia comes up as a Yankee?
I don't think of a particular game. I think of just the guy that I want on the mound. He's just a hoss and he's a fiery competitor and will do anything for your team. That was that's like when I think of CC, I'm like, he's the guy. He's an anchor on this team, and a leader of men, and will come out in any big game, no matter what the situation. And I trust him with the ball. That's what I think of when I think of a particular game. I think of him screaming at the bench of the Tampa Bay Rays. That's for you, bitch. And like fiery, but that moment I think serves the thought I have of him, of being like a really good teammate, an unbelievable competitor, and a guy that you just trust.
I think of leadership. That's the first thing I think of when I think of CC. I think of the leadership and the impact, the positive impact he had on the Yankees clubhouse, not just in 2009, which there's a lot of stories written about. One of the biggest reasons Brian Cashman wanted CC Sabathia in 2009 is because the clubhouse had gotten way too tight in those mid 2000s. And CC Sabathia brought some levity, along with AJ Burnett and Nick Swisher and all these other guys who brought some levity, but also just some like, hey, we're playing a sport here. This is supposed to be fun. Couple that with the fact he put the team on his back for large periods of time and just pitched them through things. But yeah, I think of leadership. So I put the five moments after doing a bit of digging of his Yankees career, and I'll go number 5 all the way up to number 1.
Real quick before you get into the 5, the other piece that I always remember about CC is even before he got to the Yankees, and I'm not even talking about Cleveland, but when he got traded to the Milwaukee Brewers, the fact that he was going into a free agent year, he knew that. And he was going to a new team where he didn't know anybody. He was just like put into this situation where he was in a fight towards the end of the year, and the guy was throwing on like 3 days rest, and he was just going
3
out
days
there.
Rest in September to pitch them into the playoffs.
Yeah, he total disregard for his own long-term career, and just being a competitor in the moment and understanding that he'll do whatever it takes for the team that he's on in that moment. And it's not like he had to build a whole bunch of rapport with that team. He just got traded over to that team, and he felt obligated that was the right thing to do, and that's just his part of his character as well. So when I saw that, I had 2 thoughts. I'm like, yes, love this. This is exactly the guy I want on there. And 2 was like, I really hope he didn't burn his arm out in Milwaukee before he signs with the Yankees.
Yeah. A lot of players a lot of agents would have talked their client into, hey, no, just go out there every 5 days. That's all you need to do.
Yeah. And I'm sure they tried, and he just didn't listen.
No, that's the leadership that I'm talking about with Sabathia. Yep. So number 5, this one might sound odd, but checking himself into rehab right before the 2015 playoffs started. And then that allowed him, I think, to reinvent himself towards the end of his career, because he had a really rough 2013, 2014. He was obviously battling alcoholism, but he was not good on the mound. He actually started to pitch a little bit better in 2015. And the Yankees, I don't think were ever going to go on a deep playoff run in 2015. I think they had fizzled out that season, but he checked himself into rehab right before the playoffs started. And that just tells you about the character of him, and taking ownership of his mistakes, and that he needed help. And I think he was able to do, by him doing that, I think that was probably a big factor in him extending his career another 3-4 seasons.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It was the fact that he was able to reinvent himself too after going through that stuff, and was able to talk about it after not talking about it for a while, was a big. It spoke to his character. I think looking at who the guy was, people struggle, everybody struggles. A lot of times you don't know about it, and that was kind of the case there. And then he came out of the other side, much better.
The number 4 spot, if you look at his 2009 ALCS against Anaheim, he made 2 starts, 16 innings, only 2 runs allowed. He pitched the Yankees into the World Series against Anaheim in that 09 ALCS. Number 3, this one actually stuck out in my mind too, because he was on the mound in Game 5, 2017 ALDS against Corey Kluber in Cleveland, when the Yankees were way underdogs in that series. And he only pitched 4 1/3 innings, but he gave up 2 runs, struck out 9 in 4 1/3, outpitched Kluber in that game. Kluber gave up the 2 bombs to Didi Gregorius. CC was making sliding catches, just making divots in the infield with his knee brace, and kind of just willed the Yankees into the middle of that game to get them to the bullpen for the Yankees to end up winning that game. Number 2 spot is That's for You, Bitch. Like you said, just if there's a fight, CC Sabathia is going to back up his teammates. It doesn't matter. He doesn't ask what, he just asks when and where. That's the type of guy he is. So he yelled, "That's for you, bitch," on September 27, 2018, after the Rays reliever Andrew Kittredge threw behind the head of Yankees catcher Austin Romine. CC Sabathia then pegged Jesus Sucre in the left thigh and screamed, "That's for you, bitch," towards the Tampa Bay dugout. Just hilarious and
amazing. And like as a fan, when you're watching your team play, these guys who get paid millions of dollars and they're professional athletes, and you're an emotionally way too locked in, completely irrational fan, and you see a guy that's also a little crazy and irrational and acting with emotion like that, you absolutely love it. And he cemented himself as like an all-timer at that point because of the way that he reacted in the moment.
Have you seen The Town with Ben Affleck?
No.
There's a point where him and the Jeremy Ritter, whatever his name is, the guy who plays like his buddy in that movie, who's a complete nutcase. They're like, "Oh, we gotta go. Are you in? Like, it's gonna be dangerous." He goes, "Whose car are we taking?" Because like he doesn't answer. That's CC. She's like, "Yeah, I'm there for you."
Yeah.
The number one spot, CC's complete game 1-run performance against Baltimore in the 2012 ALDS Game 5 win to clinch the series. That was also the series where you had Raul Bañez hit those 2 dramatic home runs, but he pitched a complete game 1-run performance to get the Yankees into the ALCS in 2012. And that was obviously pretty much the end of that Yankees team in 2012. They fizzled out in the ALCS. But if you look at CC Sabathia's career, from 2007 with the Cleveland, pitching deep into the playoffs. He pitched into the playoffs a ton of innings with Milwaukee, and then the 2009 through 2012 run with the Yankees, always in the playoffs. Like, you just compile all those innings of postseason as well. That's a whole season worth of probably stress level innings that he's thrown. Not a season worth, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, a lot of innings. The dude threw it, and he was able to carry it. And that was the other thing when you look back at his reinvention of himself as well. The fact that his weight fluctuated multiple times, which means he had to pitch differently. Like the pendulum was off a little bit, so you had to figure some things out. And the decrease in velocity, allowed him made him really redo his pitch mix as well. And I know Andy Pettit was part of the reconstruction of some of those pitches and helped him out on the side as well. But it's just impressive because usually at that point, guys fizzle out and they're done. Like they kind of go into the moonlight at that point, but he did not. He came back and was an effective pitcher in a very different style.
He gave them a number of quality innings in the 2017, 2018, and even parts of 2019 before he eventually, you knew that the end was there. But if in 2014 you told me he was going to pitch until 2019, I would not have believed you.
Right. No, definitely not. It looked like it was over.
He said he's going to wear a Yankees cap going into the Hall of Fame, which is obviously nice to hear. It makes sense as well. And this means he's most likely going to get his number retired and put into Monument Park for the Yankees. So there'll be a CC Sabathia day at some point this coming season. And it is well deserved. I know I'm biased. I thought he wasn't going to get in on his first ballot. I thought he would be a low 70% and then get in on a second ballot type of guy. But I was happy to see him get in on his first ballot.
Yeah, so I think he's deserving. And go back to the even pre-Yankee years. Like the guy was a machine, put up huge numbers as a lefty. He's one of the most dominant left-handed pitchers of the era that I've been watching.
Yeah, you've got, what was it? He one of how many lefties for 3,000 strikeouts? I wrote it down here. Only 3 left-handed pitchers with 3,000 strikeouts. He's one of 3.
Yeah, there you go.
And he is, like I said, he's kind of these types of pitchers, the pitchers who throw that many innings, they don't exist.
They don't exist anymore.
I
do think it'll swing back. I think it's going to swing back at some point.
Really?
Because, I think I think it will swing back. I think that.
Do you think there's going to be a 300 game winner again? Because the closest guy right now is Justin Verlander, and he's 3 more seasons from 300 wins.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go that far. I don't think it's going to go that far, and I don't think it's going to last as long. I think that we're in the midst of like multiple swings. I do think that you're going to start seeing guys go deeper. I don't think it's going to be the way that we used to see it. But and for especially for the an entire career, I don't see that happening. And if that does happen, it's gonna have to take a little while, because it's gonna the youth, the way that the development is happening, at the lower levels is going to have to change. Like it's going to have to be almost a full generation for it to swing back. And I just don't know if that's going to happen fully.
Yeah, and you think about the starting pitchers who pitched around CC Sabathia, maybe still pitching. Like Verlander's a first ballot Hall of Famer. There's no question about that. I think Scherzer's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think Jacob deGrom is going to be a first ballot. I think for his dominance, I think he's going to be.
I don't know if he put enough years together.
Maybe not, but he was undoubtedly the best pitcher in baseball for a period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think off the top of my head the other starting pitchers who are going to get in the next, call it 10 years. I can't think of another one. I'm sure there are, but all right. The next thing,
Kershaw.
Oh yeah, obviously, definitely. So we already said this, but one person didn't vote for Ichiro, and it's just like asinine. It's the same thing when Ken Griffey Jr. didn't get 100%. It's like, I would love for that person to have to explain themselves as to why this person's not a Hall of Famer.
And that's the thing. If he had to explain himself, he would have voted for Ichiro.
Right.
Like, there's no doubt. Unless he's just a complete asshole. But then everybody in the world knows he's an asshole.
So he is the international hit king, 4,367 hits, which is more than Pete Rose, but he obviously doesn't have it for Major League Baseball. Do you consider him the hit king, though, or do you still think Pete Rose, also not in the Hall of Fame for different reasons, is the hit king?
It's Pete Rose.
Yeah, I agree. But I think
you can't go international. Like it's just a different conversation.
Different.
It doesn't take anything away from Ichiro, because he spent a whole, he spent a good amount of time.
3,000 hits in Major League Baseball after he spent 10 years.
Well, that's the thing. He spent 10 years, and if those 10 years were here, it's a different story.
Do you think he gets to be the player? Say Ichiro he instead of coming over to baseball in 2001, he came over to baseball in 2021. Does he get to be that type of player today?
I don't think he comes up as the same type of player. I don't think he's the guy that can spray the ball all over the place. I think you'd see more power from him, because he had the power. He's shown it multiple times where he's got that power. When he wants it, he's got it. So, it's very possible that the makeup of the player is different because of the way that he develops as well. If they see raw power early on, 10 years later, as he's starting off, they may be putting him more into that power stroke, and you may just see a different type of guy. So I don't know. It's difficult. I think it's hard to say, but just as like overall, when you're looking at players, and he played in Seattle, which is the furthest place you could possibly play from New York, and to pay attention to guys out there, in the tri-state, living in the tri-state area is a difficult thing, but he definitely made it a point. Everybody made it a point to follow Ichiro, and everybody knew what was going on with Ichiro because he was that dynamic of a player. And I'm happy that, his major league tour touched the Yankee Stadium. He was able to put on the pinstripes, because it was fun. It was just fun to have him on the team. He was still a productive player. For
when he came over, but then they added a year, and it was
yeah. But he was still a productive player when he came over, and you're like, you got to see some of it. The mannerisms are just like so clearly distinct with him, and then the other thing about him that I think of is that little sit down interview with Bob Costas, talking about the Heat in Kansas City, where he just drops an F-bomb out of absolutely nowhere. And the fact that he did know how to speak English, but chose not to because he didn't want to talk to the American media. I love that. It's so Larry David of him that, I'm sure Larry David took some nods from Ichiro with, as much of a cynical asshole not wanting to talk to it. It's great though. He was a fun player to watch.
And I saw where it's like, oh, it's good. Mariano is still. And listen, we're not going to go into this news surrounding Mariano Rivera right now, because it's obviously heinous if it's true, and we don't know what's going on if it's true. There's still, I'm sure, stuff to be reported on. But it's like, oh, now Mariano's still the only unanimous. there should be more unanimous players.
Yes, there should be more unanimous. And again, you go back to some of these like simple rule changes that we talked at the top of the show here, and you would get them because the guys who should get them, who are 1 or 2 votes off, are clearly, Hall of Famers, unanimous Hall of Famers, no doubt Hall of Famers. I don't want that stink to like. It shouldn't be a stink on any guy either.
That he's not a unanimous?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Ichiro is also, along with obviously Mariano Rivera, just super unique. A unique player. Not just a great player, a unique player.
Yeah.
All right. A couple other things from the voting results. So Carlos Beltran got 70.3%. This is his 3rd year on the ballot. I think if it's not for that Houston cheating scandal, he's already a Hall of Famer.
Maybe. I mean, do you think that should be considered, considering this is about
I don't see why he's not at this point. I think his career numbers are on par with many center field Hall of Famers who are not in. Or who are in. This is one of those things where, like, don't get too big, like, because we're in control here. Mm-hmm.
We are in control. Yeah, I don't know how. I wouldn't surprise me if that was part of it.
Andrew Jones, 66.2%. This is his 8th year on the ballot. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer as much as I thought he was a tremendous player. And
I think he's a great player. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer.
Yep. Chase Utley, 39.8%, not a Hall of Famer. Alex Rodriguez, it's a steroid conversation, but it's the highest vote, 37.1%, highest vote he's received so far.
Yeah.
And if A-Rod gets in, I think, have to retroactively put Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens and some of these other steroid guys in.
So you talked earlier about the turnover in voters. So that's helping these guys, I think. As the voters get younger, it's going to help the steroid guys out.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because I think younger people care less about steroids.
Agreed. And they, yes, I agree. I think some of the older guys that saw eras before the steroids and then saw the steroid era are absolutely hold it against them and believe that it's against everything that baseball's fabric is about.
Manny Ramirez got 34.3%, 9th year on the ballot. I don't think he's going to ever get in. He obviously deserves to be in. He was one of the best hitters I've ever seen.
He's the most lethal right-handed bat I've ever seen in my life. I was scared to death of him every time he walked up to the plate.
Yeah, and that's a gut thing. Is Manny Ramirez a Hall of Famer? Yes, of course.
Yes.
Andy Pettitte, we already talked about him. He's up to 27.9%. Again, as much as I love Andy Pettitte, I do not think he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. I agree. I think he's a very good player, not a Hall of Famer.
Felix Hernandez, we talked about, and then the rest of these guys on this list: Bobby Abreu, Jimmy Rollins, Omar Vizquel, Dustin Pedroia, Mark Burley, Francisco Rodriguez. Oh, Felix Hernandez, we did not talk about. We talked about Francisco Rodriguez. Felix Hernandez, 1st year on the ballot, 20.6%. That surprised me. It was that low.
Yeah. How long was his career? I can't read the.
So the numbers I put in here are his 8-year prime from 2009 to 2016. But his career, I forget. I didn't write it down. It wasn't the longest of careers, and he did win a Cy Young when he was a 500 pitcher. So the voters in that year acknowledged like there's more to just winning and losing baseball games. Yeah. He was arguably the best starting pitcher in baseball in that era, in that period of time.
And he was a victim of a bad team as well in a lot of cases. So, but gut check, like Felix Hernandez is a Hall of Famer. My gut says no.
I guess from that standpoint, I guess my point was 20% was low in my opinion. I thought he'd get more.
And that was his first time on.
First time on.
So looking at guys like that's trending in a good direction for a starting pitcher.
Well, it's like, here's the thing. Andy Pettitte got 7% more vote than Felix Hernandez, and that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Well, you know what I'm going to do as soon as we get off here is I'm going to compare Andy Pettitte's numbers to Felix Hernandez's numbers.
Well, you compile the longevity and Andy Pettitte's playoff track record. Then
he might have better numbers.
Who was a more dominant pitcher, though? David Wright, Torrey Hunter, super low.
Who do you trust more in a game? Who are you going to give the ball to?
I don't know. I never saw Felix Hernandez in a big game. And then we've got players who dropped off less than 5% is Ian Kinsler, Russell Martin, Brian McCann, Troy Tulowitzki, Curtis Granderson, Adam Jones, Carlos Gonzalez, Hanley Ramirez, Fernando Rodney, and the Swiss Army knife himself, Ben Zobrist.
Carlos Gonzalez is one of those guys who you talk about for his first few years, like trending, who's going to be same with Tulowitzki. And unfortunately they didn't continue to go.
The 4 votes, one of them, I don't even know if he has a vote. He doesn't have a vote, but Brian Cashman voted for Troy Tulowitzki.
Yeah, absolutely he did. He paid someone to do it.
He paid someone to vote for it. All right. Well,
does Cashman's daughter get a vote? She does stuff for the Yes Network.
Not the dumbest Hall of Fame years, because CC and Ichiro, I'm so happy those guys are in. I'm not the biggest fan of Billy Wagner. This is no Scott Rowland getting into the Hall of Fame, yeah. But still something to complain about, and I'm sure we'll complain next year about somebody. Not a whole bunch of Yankees news going on right now. It's the calm before the spring training storm, I guess. Still holes to be filled on the Yankees roster. I don't know what they're necessarily waiting for. I know Sherman wrote something talking about how the Yankees are trying to free up Stroman's money before adding more payroll because tax roll, luxury tax purposes, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. It's just
they're right there. They're on that line that we've talked about in the past of like, is he's been public. Steinbrenner has been public talking about, we don't need a $300 million roster to compete and he's probably right now looking at the American League where all the talent's in the National League. So he's like, well, maybe we don't have to spend as much money, but they're teetering on it right now. I think it's last year they were at 316 and they're at 303 currently as of right now. And the threshold, the top tax threshold is 301. And because
so they're looking to get rid of half of Stroman's contract so they can add someone else and still be around that number, I guess.
Yeah. And the fact that they are a tax violator for the last 3 straight years, the Yankees must pay $1.10 for every dollar that is over the $301 million. So if they spend an additional $10 million, that will become 11 million in penalties. So that's a $21 million contract essentially for a $10 million guy.
Pour one out for Steinbrenner.
Yes.
Just struggling to make.
But it's a thing.
I know it's a thing, and I hate that it's a thing, because the team you just lost to in the World Series this offseason went out and said, what if we just signed all the good players?
Yeah. They have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Okay.
It's like,
so they're deferring all the money.
They signed Tanner Scott, and they brought in, they obviously made a number of other big signings who we've already talked about, and then Roki Sasaki. So they're just a Japanese all-star team mixed with an American all-star team, and it is just a juggernaut of a roster.
Their bullpen now is wild. The fact that Tanner Scott signed there also is just it's an embarrassment of riches in the pitching side now too in the bullpen. Now they're starters because they have they have an all-star at every starting position in the rotation, and now their bullpen is deep as all hell. They also signed Kirby Yates, by the way, who had a fantastic year. Those are the 2 guys that when we were talking about in our quasi GM
and
episode,
Yates was not even a lot of money, right?
No, he was such a great addition to a bullpen that was accessible and right there for anybody to take. And Tanner Scott even pay the money, man. Just pay that money to get that dominant lefty guy, because now the Yankees are still in that situation where they don't have a lefty relief pitcher. They think that they can get some lefties out with a combination of their right-handed guys who have good metrics against their lefties, but they don't have a lefty. And it's a similar situation they walked into last year with. Tim Hill's still hanging out around there too. At this point, just sign Tim Hill and let's go with the crackhead and see what happens, because he was good for us.
I hate reading a story about how Steinbrenner's trying to fiddle around with the luxury tax, and then you just see other teams out there being like, well, we're capable of blowing past this because we can win right now, and so we're going to do it.
Yeah. And right now, you look at Juan Soto's comments about the future of a team now after, when he signed with the Mets and their prospects of doing well. I mean, it's everybody else in the Dodgers. The Dodgers are going to be the favorite to win the World Series for the next at least 5 years, probably. And you're looking at coming out of that National League. You got to get lucky, because every single position player, every single pitcher, whether it's a starting pitcher or a reliever that they're throwing at you, is an all-star caliber guy. They have a very good all-star team. It's not just an all-star team. It's a very good all-star team. All the way up and down that entire roster. So, you're competing in meanwhile, the American League is just
I read something that the Dodgers, they don't know how they possibly might not be able to fit Max Muncy into their roster.
They're not even going to be able to fit Clayton Kershaw onto their roster.
But like Max Muncy's still a productive major league player, and they're like, we don't.
Max Muncy would be our starting third baseman.
Yes. I was like, good. Send him to the Yankees, please.
Yeah. So they still need to figure it out. But right now, as we talked a couple weeks ago, we're in a similar situation where you're looking at DJ LeMahieu as the starting third baseman, second baseman, one of the two. That's where they are.
That's not competitive, though. That's not competitive.
But here's the deal. Like, what's going to change that?
No,
what are you going to do
unless you're acquiring a player? But
they would have to acquire the right player that would also fit into their money situation as well.
Well,
I read Brendan Donovan fits into that. So go back, you fit my plan in, and it's beautiful for everybody because you get the low, the low price controlled player who fits the roster absolutely perfect. So if I'm the Yankees, I'm going over to St. Louis still and overpaying for him.
I read that the Dodgers actually might be interested in Arenado, bringing him from St. Louis, and that would mean they would move Muncy.
Yeah, I mean, do I want Muncy at the end of the day? Like,
I want him more than I want DJ LeMahieu playing third base.
Yeah, yes. But DJ, looking at second and third base, he's third base. Cabrera plays a good third base. He'll play third. Maybe they're going to do some kind of a platoon thing at this point. But that's what we're looking at right now.
Oswaldo Cabrera?
Yeah.
That's our plan?
I'm telling you, that is what currently exists.
That's the plan.
And Jazz at second base. Yeah, I think that's because otherwise you're flexing two of those guys over to second. DJ, I don't think has the range for second anymore, so he's probably third. Yes.
And how are you feeling about that plan?
Yeah, I've talked about it multiple times. I don't like it.
Yeah, but to your point,
if those two guys are backups and you can fit them in different areas, and you have a starting third baseman and a starting second baseman, then I feel better. This team is in a good spot.
Yeah, but to your point, it's like the American League is definitely the weaker league right now. So figure it out at some point throughout the year and just win the American League. But they've only won the American League once in the last however many 13, 15 years or whatever. It's not exactly easy to just win the American League.
That's true. But at the same time, they don't have to start the season with that guy if they don't have that guy.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. They can still acquire someone to fill that gap when the terrible plan going into the season ultimately fails.
All right. That's going to wrap it up for today. We'll be definitely recording again before Yankees pitchers and catchers report. Spring training starts in the middle of February. I still expect more dominoes to fall on the roster, although baseball offseason doing baseball offseason things, just waiting until the very, very last moment.
One thing that we didn't talk about because it's really not much news is that the coaching staff was announced and it's practically identical. Same guy waving home third base. He did
a bang up job dugout, in the postseason.
Same dugout, essentially. For the most part, there's I think Preston Claiborne was an ad who, if you remember that name, he was a Yankee prospect way back when. I think he was dubbed the next Jabba at one point.
Is that good?
He's been in the Yankees farms doing some coaching down in the.
I'm assuming he was dubbed the next Jabba when Jabba was still a hot prospect.
Yeah, no, when Jabba was coming out there, throwing some dominant bullpen innings.
What would be a fun thing to do at some point? Maybe I'll spend some time looking this up. Most hyped Yankees players, like prospects that fizzled out of all time.
Brian Jordan.
But Jabba might be number one. And the thing with Jabba is,
I look at him differently.
They messed Jabba up.
Yes, exactly. I look at him differently because of that. I look at him differently because
one reason or another, though, he got. I
think he got screwed. I think he got screwed in multiple ways. But yes, the Yankee system, in the way that they had him, going all over the place, the goddamn midges. Come on, Torey. The one criticism of Torey, please stop that game.
Pull the field
off.
Stop that game. Pull the team off the field.
Don't let this.
He wrote that in his book. He wrote that in his book, though. He said that was one of his biggest regrets as Yankees managers. He should have taken his team off the field.
Yeah.
Also, umpires like just stop the game.
Yeah. There's 1-inch long bugs all over this man, and he's trying to go through it, and like it's just, and then you make it worse by
the bug spray made it worse apparently. Yeah. I'm sure Cleveland knew that.
I'm sure they did. I wouldn't have told anybody if I was Cleveland. Yeah, here, here, use this. It'll definitely get rid of them.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.